I stood outside Windmere Palace for 11 years and never said a word. Not when a man spat near my boots on a Saturday afternoon. Not when a woman held her phone 6 inches from my face and counted how long I could go without blinking. Not when a boy threw a coin at my bearskin to see if it would ring. 11 years, silence. And the day I finally broke it, it wasn't over an insult. It wasn't over a person at all. It was over an aeroplane. My name is Harlan Voss. I served in the Thornville Household Guard, and if you'd asked me back then what my job was, I'd have told you it was to stand still. That's it. Stand still and let the world happen in front of you. The world happened a lot in front of me. Windmere isn't like the big palaces. It sits low and gray at the edge of a runway, about 40 minutes out from the capital, and half of it is a working airfield. Old bones, built when the royal family still traveled by propeller. There's a fence along the eastern side where tourists press up against the wire with their cameras, and beyond that fence the tarmac. And on the tarmac, for as long as anyone could remember, sat the Queen's aircraft. Not a jet, nothing grand. A small silver twin-engine thing with a black nose and a crest painted just behind the cockpit door. Tail letters IR-1. Isolde Regina 1. Queen Isolde flew it herself. That's the part people forget now. She learned as a girl when the country was frightened and short of pilots and nobody was fussy about who sat in what seat. She kept the license for 61 years. On winter mornings I saw this maybe a dozen times. She'd come out of the west door alone, in a coat that had been mended at the elbow, and she'd walk across the frost to that plane and just stand next to it, hand flat on the fuselage, like you touch a horse. She never spoke to me. I never expected her to. But once, and I've never told this to anyone properly, she stopped on her way back in and looked at my face for about 2 seconds and said, "It's colder for you than it is for me." Then she went inside. That was it. That was the whole thing. 11 years of standing, and that's the sentence I got. She died in the spring. You know how it goes, the bells, the black cars, the crowds 4 deep at the wire. I stood through all of it. My legs went numb somewhere around the second hour, and I kept standing, because that's the job, and because there was nothing else I could do for her. The plane stayed on the tarmac. For 14 months it sat there under a canvas, and every morning the old ground crew chief, a man named Bertram Kell, walked out and checked the tire pressure. Nobody asked him to. Nobody was flying it. He was 73 and he'd been maintaining that aircraft since he was 19, and he checked the tires because the tires needed checking. I used to watch him do it from my post, same time every day. Kneel, check, stand, pat the wheel twice, walk away. That was the shape of things. Frost, tourists, the wire, Bertram, the plane. And then on a Thursday in November, the black cars came back. You learn to read cars when you stand still for a living. Ceremonial cars come slow. They arrive with an escort, they park at angles someone has thought about. These came fast, 3 of them, and they parked wherever they liked. Doors opened before the wheels had properly stopped. The Queen Consort, Marguerite, got out of the second car, and out of the third came her son, Julian Vance, her boy from her first marriage, long before the throne, no royal blood in him at all. 38 years old, very good coat, the sort of man who checks his reflection in aircraft windows and pretends he's checking the weather. They walked out onto the tarmac, papers in a folder. I could hear them from where I stood because sound carries strangely across concrete on a cold day. Something about registration, something about transfer of title. And then Julian said, quite clearly, "Get the crest off it before Monday." I felt something go tight behind my ribs. There were maybe 60 tourists at the wire that morning. Ordinary people, cold, hoods up, taking pictures of a soldier who wasn't moving. They didn't know what they were watching. Some of them were watching me. A little girl in a yellow hat had been trying for 10 minutes to make me smile. Then Bertram came out of the hangar with his toolbox. They'd told him. Somebody had told him and he'd said yes because he was 73 and it wasn't his aeroplane and it never had been. He walked to the tail. He set the box down. He knelt. And he didn't open it. He just stayed there on his knees on the wet concrete with one hand on the tail fin. And he didn't move. And he didn't look up. And the wind came across the runway and lifted the canvas at the corner and dropped it again. Nobody said anything. Julian checked his watch. The girl in the yellow hat had stopped trying to make me smile. She was watching the old man. I want you to understand something about the guard. We don't move. That is not a tradition, it's the whole point. Everything else in the country can shake and we do not. Your feet are planted, your eyes go forward, and whatever is happening in front of you is not your business. 11 years. Not once. I broke it. I brought my rifle up, turned on my heel, and I walked out onto the tarmac. I heard someone at the wire gasp. Somebody's phone came up. My sergeant said my name once, sharp, and then didn't say it again, because he'd realized he had no idea what I was doing, and neither did I. 22 paces. I counted them without meaning to. I stopped 6 feet from that aeroplane. Marguerite was staring at me. Julian had gone very still, the way people do when they aren't sure yet if they should be angry or afraid. And I didn't say a word to either of them. I turned to face the aircraft, and I saluted it. Here's the thing about standing still for 11 years. Behind me at the gatehouse, there were 4 other men who had been standing still too. Men who'd never spoken to her either. Men who knew what a mended elbow on a coat meant. I heard the first pair of boots come off the stone about 3 seconds later. By the time I lowered my arm, there were 5 of us on that tarmac, in a line, facing a canvas-covered plane, holding a salute for a woman who had been dead 14 months, and who had once told a frozen boy at a gate that it was colder for him than it was for her. Not one of us said anything. That was the whole point. We'd never said anything. The wire went completely silent. 60 people, no talking, no shutter clicks even. The little girl in the yellow hat took her hat off. I don't know who taught her that. I hope somebody thanks them one day. Bertram was still kneeling. He was crying and he wasn't hiding it, and he didn't stand up and nobody made him. I expected to be finished. I genuinely did. I stood there working out how I'd tell my mother I'd been dismissed for insubordination on a Thursday. Then Marguerite walked past me. Not to the cars, to the plane. She stopped at the fuselage. She looked at that crest for a long time, the crest her son wanted gone by Monday, and then she reached out and put her hand flat on the metal. Exactly where Isolde used to put hers. I don't think she knew she was doing it. That's what I've never been able to shake. I think her hand just went there, the way your hand knows a door handle in the dark. She stood like that a while. Then she said without turning round, the crest stays. Julian started to speak. She held up one finger, still not looking at him, and he stopped. She got the aeroplane. Legally, properly, it went to her son that winter, and there was nothing anybody could have done about it. And I want to be honest about that because it's the part people leave out when they tell this story back to me. But the crest stayed. IR-1 is still painted on that tail. And in the spring, they moved the whole aircraft into the National Air Museum, on loan. And if you go and see it, there's a small card beside the port wheel that gives Bertram Kell's name and the number of years he looked after it. 62 in the end. He got one more. I wasn't dismissed. I was called in, and a colonel with tired eyes read out the regulation I'd broken, and then he closed the folder and asked me, off the record, what she'd been like. I told him about the coat. He nodded for a while and told me to get back to my post. That's it, that's all that happened. I stood in the cold, I walked 22 paces, I raised my hand and I walked back. People ask me now if I regret breaking the silence. And I tell them the truth, which is that I don't think I broke anything. 11 years I stood there, and every one of those years I was saying the same thing without opening my mouth. This matters. She matters. I will not move. That morning, I just said it where someone could hear.